All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Tony Whatley. Tony, welcome to the show. It's so awesome to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, Kevin. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you, brother.
Same. And I got to give a shout out to Kyrie Oliver because you and I wouldn't even be here right now, Tony, if it wasn't for Kyrie. And I know you and Kyrie, you guys go back a little ways, and you and Kyrie go back about 6 years. I met him probably a year and a half ago, and I had him on the podcast here as well. And when I was asking him, I was like, Kyrie, now that you've had this experience, who are a couple entrepreneurs that you feel I should absolutely interview for the show? And Tony, you were one of the ones that just topped his list of, Kev, you got to interview Tony. And so here we are. And it's really cool because here we are having this conversation. First time we have ever met. And yet, because we have this mutual friend in Kyrie, it's like we can just start having a conversation. It's like we've known each other for years just because we've got this mutual friend in Kyrie. And so
Right.
just another testament to the power of relationships, which is kind of what this podcast is all about. And so
Yeah, Kyrie's a funny dude, and he puts a lot of witty stuff out there. And one thing that most people wouldn't know about Kyrie is that he's not just a keyboard warrior. If you ever get to meet him in person, he's a giant human. That's the easiest way to say it. He's a giant dude. He's probably, I don't know what Kyrie, he's probably 6'5", 6'6". He's a big dude.
he is a big
And
guy.
so I can imagine like some of the people that talk smack to him on his Facebook profile, like you wouldn't say that in person, bro.
That's
I just know
right.
you. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Yes. Well, I'll tell you what I'd like to do, Tony, is just start off by turning it over to you so that we can set a little bit of context, let people know a little bit about, who Tony is, what's Tony all about, and so I'd like to just give you the floor so you can share, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you do and the impact you're making. And we'll just start there, Tony.
Good stuff. So yeah, in the context of the listeners being entrepreneurs, I would say that I've always been an entrepreneur. I've been the kid hustler. I was the mowing yards, walking dogs, washing cars, selling candy. I did all those kind of things. I grew up lower middle class in a pretty crappy neighborhood in a good city that had a good school district because my mom mostly valued education. She's a Japanese immigrant. I was actually born in Japan myself. My dad's a Vietnam combat vet, U.S. Marine. And he just taught me the ethics of working hard and doing the right things and just being respectful and things like that, where my mom was really focused on, having self-confidence and dreaming bigger and valuing really the education side of things. And I was a straight A student, played varsity sports, broke the curves on a lot of those things and just pushed myself. So I was always self-motivated to do those kind of things. And, I ended up going to engineering school because I was on that path to six figures and trying to make over 100,000 a year. And I would have been the first one in my family on both sides to go to college. I put myself through school as a welder, as a pipe fitter, as a construction worker. Also
Wow.
waited tables on the weekends in that time. And it took me about 7 years to graduate school, but I eventually became a mechanical engineer and I worked in the oil and gas industry. About 20 years in that career on the executive path and project management, managing hundreds of millions of dollars. But it really wasn't scratching the itch for me and my passion, which has always been cars. I always loved building and racing cars. And so I built these businesses as a side businesses on how to, make your cars faster, how to make them look better, how to become a better driver, things like that. And I built these online communities, which two different online communities, about a 500,000 registered members combined on both of those.
Okay.
So we built the number one performance community for General Motors, which was ls1tech.com. And eventually I was cash flowing about $400,000 a year profit as a side business. We were purchased by a private equity company in 2007 for 2.3 million cash. So I built these businesses as a side business while working a very successful career. And it was never something that was supposed to make a lot of money. It was just a lot of passion for it. I was teaching myself how to code and design web pages and do graphic design and Photoshop and eventually photography for the big magazines. And all these skills that I was learning just eventually became a good payout, which
Yeah.
I never really counted on. And I think that you probably had a lot of guests that became very financially successful from things that they just enjoyed doing. It wasn't
Yeah.
never about the money.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. And you're right, that's been my experience too, is and I get it, a lot of times, entrepreneurs when they're getting started, they are kind of focused on cash flow because you need cash flow to keep the business going. But once you
Mhm.
get to a certain point, more revenue, more cash flow is no longer what inspires us to keep going. It's whatever it is. It's purpose, it's impact, it's legacy. It's one or all three of those, that we look at, and like I know that's what excites me is making an impact in the world, and revenue ends up being the byproduct of that. And
Yes.
and that's kind of like what you
Revenue feeds ego, profit feeds families.
yes, yes, yes.
There's a
So
lot of nowadays out there on social media. We see the 7-figure this, 8-figure that, 2 comma club trophy this. It's all based on big revenue numbers. You got all the marketers out there talking about revenue, sales. But you and I both know there's some 8-figure, which is 10 million plus revenue companies that make less profit than a 1 million
totally.
revenue company that has high profit margin. Guys, there's companies out there making 50 million in sales, but they're losing a million or two a year.
Yeah.
So revenue to me, especially in the business circles, is just a lot of bullshit ego that people like to throw out there. But dude, profit is king. If you're not making profit, you're a charity.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's we gotta have profit. You're right, and I mean, yeah, the revenue is completely irrelevant. It's like what do you end up keeping, and what can you impact and affect with that? And you're right, that's what feeds families. That's what takes care of our team and their families and our vendors and all of that kind of stuff. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and there's
Well,
just too many people in entrepreneurship space that listen to these shows, they go to these events, they listen to the influencers, they follow these big names, and they chase revenue because they feel like that validates them as an entrepreneur. So if you're a 7-figure business owner, for some jacked up reason, I think it's because of social media and all the hype, they think that they need to become an 8-figure business owner to validate how good they are as an entrepreneur. And I always question that because I'm a business coach now, I'm a high performance coach, and most of my private clients are 7 and 8-figure business owners that are scaling and exiting.
mhm.
And they feel like there's always some validation that they needed from the market or from the entrepreneur magazines or something like that, or the big stages that they're not getting invited to. And they just think that the revenue will get them there. And we really work on deconstructing that and realizing that's just ego based. We need to scale your company, but we need to scale the profit alongside. We don't want to just scale revenue because that usually just means scaling stress and anxiety and pressure if you're not really getting enough breathing room from the profit that's missing.
Mhm.
So you and I both know that if you're a company that's making $500,000 profit, regardless of the revenue, you're a better entrepreneur than somebody else is making $100,000 profit. Better, regardless of the revenue. If you have a $10 million company, you're not making any profit. This dude with a smaller sales organization is kicking your ass as an entrepreneur. But most people don't talk about the real truths.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned that a lot of entrepreneurs, think or feel that they will get validation when they hit a certain revenue point,
Absolutely.
whether that's six
Absolutely.
figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, 9 figures. In your
Mhm.
experience, because like I know, that chasing revenue, I mean, and really chasing a lot of goals, if we don't just we start chasing goals, especially revenue, and we get like let's say we're shooting for that 7 figure mark, and we're getting close. Well, we've already expanded our goal and moved on to the next thing, and we don't even take time to stop and celebrate. And we think that like getting to that point, that 7 figures, you talked about validation, that's going to somehow make us feel a certain way. We're going to be happier, more content. And that's all BS. It's not true at all. What is your
Yeah.
take on that, Tony?
It's funny. Even Even when I was working full-time corporate, I had a really high paying salary. I was making about 250,000 a year. And I had some friends that were full-time entrepreneurs that would send me jokingly texts like, "Hey, we're at the bar and it's 2 o'clock. You bet you can't do that." And I'm looking at what their value is to the market. And I was like, bro, like you're making 50 grand a year as an entrepreneur. I'd rather be here in this office managing hundreds of millions of dollars, learning processes and systems and getting to play with some really expensive toys than sitting at a bar anyways at 2 o'clock in the afternoon thinking that that's some kind of a, a thing to brag about. Right. So, in the entrepreneurship space, it's been glorified. Everybody thinks it's like this great thing, but to me, it's like go figure out how to learn skills and knowledge that can maximize your earning potential, regardless if that's a job or starting a business. But how do I earn the most money efficiently and not spend as much time to do so? That's the kind of way I think about for entrepreneurs. And, I think that, yeah, the validation exists. And I agree that we should chase revenue, but only with our processes and our systems and our predictable profit climb along with it. Because if my entire company is an efficient organization, and I know that if I just increase the sales, I'm going to increase profit alongside that, then yeah, go chase the revenue.
Yeah.
But the problem is most people chase revenue and they sacrifice profit to do that. You see them like lowering their prices, or their service isn't as good, or their product value kind of suffers in quality, and they just keep chasing these sales figures and thinking that's something. But guys, I've sold companies, I've helped companies exit, I've seen the acquisitions, I understand how private equity works. They don't really give a shit about your sales numbers. They look at your profit margin, they look at your EBITDA. They
Mhm.
want to know what you're taking home, and that's how they calculate their valuations on multiples. So all the revenue things that you were looking for, trophies and ClickFunnels awards and all this crap, it's doesn't mean shit if you're not making profit. So the
Yeah.
profit is always king.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, Tony, and I imagine that a lot of people listening to this are finding this incredibly valuable as well. So now that we've got a little bit of context set here and people have an idea of who Tony is and what makes Tony tick, I want to switch gears just a little bit. I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So,
Mhm.
Tony, have you ever met or been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Tony, I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
I would say that I may give a different answer than maybe most of your guests.
Okay.
I did not have the mentors and things early in my life. I mean, like I said, I grew up lower middle class. Nobody in my entire family had a college education. Nobody in my entire family owned a business. I always thought that you hear these bullshit cliche phrases that kind of defeat you from pursuing things, like it takes money to make money and things like that. And well, when you don't have money, you kind of, well, I guess I'll never make money because I don't have money, right? It's like this weird circular type relationship. I always thought growing up in a small town that being a business owner meant that you had to have a brick and mortar on Main Street with your last name on the sign, right? Like you did something and your last name was on there.
Okay.
And when you don't have money, you think, man, I'm never going to be able to be a business owner. Like that takes a
Mhm.
lot of money to build a building or own a building or even rent a building, and to put my name on there and hire people. Like you got to have money to make money, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
those are all excuses that unfortunately have been perpetuated through generations, and they still exist today. So a lot of people feel, disenfranchised about pursuing entrepreneurship, when really nowadays with these cellular devices that we carry around in our pockets or our purses, the entire world is your potential customer base now. And when I started realizing that I could build viable businesses that create massive amounts of profit at high profit margin online, I started thinking about, why do I have such this hesitation about being on Main Street or putting my name on something, or, so I didn't have that. I learned through reading books. I learned through reading magazines and just by taking the actions and learning as I went. And yeah, there's costly errors. You get punched in the face, you lose
Yep. Yep.
months or years of time. You'll lose thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in lessons. But when I started these companies, the first company I started was in 2001. So over 20 years ago,
Yeah.
we didn't have social media. We didn't have these things. And I know you're that same generation. Like we didn't have that stuff.
Mm.
And at the time, there was also these huge gatekeepers. If you wanted to advertise, you had to get on television. There was gatekeepers for that. If
Yeah.
you wanted to advertise, you had to go get on FM radio. There was gatekeepers for that. It was costly things to get in front of thousands of people. And
Mhm.
so I think too many people nowadays, especially younger entrepreneurs, take for granted the luxuries we have of social media, internet, things that we didn't have prior to 1996. When you think about it, it's really in this infancy still. And so nowadays, there's really no excuse for lack of marketing, putting yourself out there, getting attention. Like these are much, much easier than they ever have been. But people are still using these stupid excuses like, well, it takes money to make money and all these things. Like, no, like all these disadvantages that we used to have are largely gone. So it's really
Yeah.
based on us. And so now that I know this, and I've sold my first company in 2007 before even Facebook and Instagram and all this even existed. Guys, it's there's so much information out there that's available nowadays. You can get on YouTube and probably learn enough to exceed a college degree in most subjects now for
Mhm.
free.
Mhm.
But why we hire coaches and things like that for the roles that I do now is for mistake avoidance. And it's also for more tactical discussions on, hard decisions. A lot of the business owners I work with, they don't have friends that they can have hard conversations with because maybe the friend circle that they're in looks up to them and just thinks that everything they do is the right answer. So they work with people like me to have really tactical discussions. We look at things, we remove emotions from things. We look at the data, we look at the risk mitigations, we look at the growth and trajectory and the historical data and evidence that we have for their companies, and we go, hey, based on the things that we know, this is the right decision. And then they go execute that, right? They
Yeah.
don't have these tactical discussions with their friends or their peers because everybody's busy. Everybody's got their own thing that they're doing. They can't be focused on what you're doing. So number one reason for hiring a performance coach or business coach is mistake avoidance.
Yeah. So, Tony, what inspired you to get into helping other entrepreneurs and doing the kind of work that you do with entrepreneurs? What inspired you to start doing that?
I think it's a character thing for most people. I think that you either want to be a coach or a mentor or you don't. And not everybody wants to be the leader. I think that when we're in leadership roles, we tend to think that everybody thinks just like us. But the reality, if you look at the numbers, is less than 1% of the population actually wants to be the leader. And that's why there's so few leaders nowadays. Everybody wants to be a follower, wants to be a part of something bigger than they are. But very few people are willing to put themselves out there, their opinions out there, their lead by example. And so we just have that character that even going back to as a kid, like I love skateboarding. Even I picked it back up about 6 months ago. Even as a kid at 13, 14 years old, I would be really like hard on myself to learn a new trick on the skateboard. I would just fall down and get back up and fall down and get back up and just keep doing that until I learned to master a trick. And then I would just keep repeating those things until I was really good at it. And then I couldn't wait to teach my friends how to do it. So there was even that,
Right?
that belief, even as a kid, that
Mm.
there's no true success without a succession plan. And there's a lot of people in this world that will get success, but they don't think about paying it forward. They don't think about all the people that help them get that. And they just kind of keep them to themselves. Like in our generation, is like, job security. Like don't share those secrets. It's job security. I heard that stuff in my career. Like
Yeah.
people really believe that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it never made sense to me. And so I've always been the person that mentored, and I was a substitute teacher for some local area high schools while I was in college. And, even in the roles while I was working up my corporate ranks, I was always mentoring people, even if that wasn't part of my roles and responsibilities. I've always been that person. When I started the companies, people would come to me and go, hey, how did you start this company? And do you think there's something we can do together? I need to learn how to do this stuff. And guys, I have helped at least 12 of my former staff members, my former employees, become multimillionaires.
Wow.
They've
Very
built
cool.
7, 8, and 9. One of them built a 9-figure company. I known him since he was in college, and I was already in my late 20s with a business. He came to me, asked for advice, taught him how to get into manufacturing, taught him how to establish the brand, build distributorships for all the products that he was starting to build. company grew and grew and grew, sold for 9 figures a year ago. So
Wow, very
yeah,
cool.
the thing about these things, I've always had this pattern of helping business owners, and I wasn't charging them. So for over 15 years, I was helping people build really successful companies. And they were always telling me, you should be teaching this. Like, why aren't you teaching this? And to be honest, I just didn't want to put myself out there. I had a very successful life. I was fine not being in the spotlight. I didn't like being on stage. I didn't want to be on camera. I didn't want to do all that kind of stuff. So I had all the excuses, but really it was I wasn't the right person to be out there on the stage. Like, I didn't invest in myself and my confidence and my speaking and my communication skills and being able to carry that story. So I was perfectly fine just being the rich dude in the background, the MVP, and letting other people get their things, and I was getting my things. But I had a near death experience racing cars in 2015. And that's the real reason I made the shift. I said, okay, had I died in that racing accident, which I thought I was going to die as I was approaching the concrete wall at 120 miles per hour,
Wow.
and I survived that and had no major injuries, but it changed my entire life because I started thinking about how would I have been remembered in that moment. And everybody listening or watching this, you should understand, if you were to perish in this moment, how would you be remembered? And you think that's a real deep question, but most people come up with an answer pretty quick. And I came up with an answer pretty quick. I would have been nice, rich guy, cool cars, gone too soon. And where that comes from is it's a basis of comparison. We start to look at our peers or people that are in our friend circles that passed away recently. And you go, well, I was kind of like that person. Well, how were they remembered? Right. We do the comparison game.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had friends in the racing, scene, especially, pass away. They were successful. They had cool cars. Everybody says, hey, gone too soon. Hope he's racing upstairs with the big man. Now, all these cliche phrases. And what was missing from that was impact. All of us can say we impact the small circle of people around us. We can impact our families. And that sounds really honorable. And it sounds like something that you would say, like, oh, my family is my purpose. Everybody says that. But if you know that you had the potential to impact millions of people and you didn't do it, did you really create the impact? And to me, the answer was no.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do I go about impacting millions of people? Well, one of the things I love to talk about is business and helping people get out of their way and find confidence and execute and become leaders. Like, these are things I've always cherished. So why am I not doing that on a bigger scale? It was because of my lower self-confidence of putting myself out there, my own insecurities, my fear of judgment, the fear of criticism, haters. All of those have come true, by the way. As my audiences grow, all of those people have appeared in my life. But my purpose was not ahead of my fear. And after that accident, my purpose became stronger than my fear.
Yeah. I am sitting here listening to everything that you're sharing, Tony. I'm like, dang, he's talking right to me, man, because I've felt every bit of that, of just, scared to put myself out there and all that kind of stuff. And but when we just step into it, well, I mean, so I'm not gonna get detracted because I can start sharing stuff, but I don't want to do that. So you just talked about impact and impacting millions of lives. And we don't get to do that on our own. We get to do that through service of others and being very intentional about who we serve. And so I want to ask you a question in regard to impact. And so if you look, because I'm sure you come up with lots of examples, but if you look back at experiences you've had where, think of a specific experience where you got to make a really big impact because of somebody else that you were serving or working with or what have you, and hands down, that would have never happened if not for the relationship you had or the work you were doing with that person. And I just thought, what pops up for you for an example for something like that, Tony?
I would say that what helped springboard my speaking and podcasting career was getting into a group called the Arate Syndicate.
Okay.
And this was a high level coaching group that's run by very famous influencers, Ed Milet and Andy Frisella. And most
Mhm.
people in entrepreneurship space knows them. We had to apply to be in this group. They selected 100 people based on the applications, which they had thousands and thousands of applications. It was costly, about 100,000 per year. For most kind of people to hear that, they're like, holy crap, how can you spend 100,000 a year for an entrepreneurship group or a coach, right? That's very expensive. If you're thinking that kind of way, it's your scarcity mindset checking in right now,
Mhm.
waving at you, because I've earned millions because of that. So $100,000 investment to me led to millions of dollars coming in because I went in and established myself as a leader, someone that was going to answer people's questions, pour into people, not really worry about what I was going to get in return. Because I understand that if I keep pouring into people, just like I put my free content out there and the free podcasts and all these things, that eventually it just comes back around. That's the way my entire life has been, is the more I contribute, the more things come back around. It's never direct. Sometimes it's 3 chains down the road or a years or even decades down the road.
Yeah.
But if you're always putting out good intentions and you're doing things for the right reason, the value and the money and all that just always comes back around. It just always does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so getting on the big stages that they put on these events, had 1,500 people in the audience, entrepreneurs, you start to see things elevate. You get invited to bigger tables. Not all the people at those tables are worthwhile or worth spending time with. Like you'll learn that too as you start to ascend the entrepreneur and the influencer space. But you do find the jewels, you do find the good people. But I would say that making that large investment, which is scary to most people, and yeah, I have put myself in a financial situation to be able to do that, but there's a lot lesser availability opportunities for people to get into doing the same thing. That's a quick way to create acceleration and results, because there was a lot of people in that space that were trying to do exactly what I was doing, but they weren't investing in themselves or putting themselves around the right people, and they don't have the results that I have today, right? So you have to be good at what you do, but there's no shame in shortcutting the process to get onto the tables that are there waiting for you.
Yeah. 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 And I'll tell you, that's been my experience too, is in investing to put ourselves in the right spaces where we have a much higher probability of being connected and in the presence of other right fit and like-minded entrepreneurs who we have shared core values with.
Yeah.
And you're right, and just because, whether it's a 25,000 investment, a 50,000, 100,000, just because the price tag, doesn't mean that everybody in there is going to have shared core values with us.
No,
And,
no, definitely not.
we do gotta like navigate, but I will
You
tell you,
find your kind. You find
yes,
your kind. You get in there, you find your kind. And
that's right.
you quickly understand who's in there for the wrong reasons and you just avoid those people.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it kind of, my buddy Jesse uses this tugboat versus lighthouse analogy,
Yep.
and
Great analogy.
attraction versus like hunting, kind of a thing.
Yep.
And you're right, you do just attract the right people towards you and stuff. And you do
You do.
find your people. And man, when you find your people and you spending time getting to know like-minded entrepreneurs who we have shared core values with, especially those that are already making an impact in the world, and you
Mhm.
start combining what we do with what they do, man, that we're talking some serious horsepower there,
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Collaboration is key. If you look at indie type of industry, we can all be friendly competitors when there's time to become competition, but you start to realize that the people at the top of every game are generally collaborating.
yes,
If it's a team effort or a company effort, you see joint ventures, you see these events that maybe there's 6 or 7 people that are always kind of supporting each other's events and speaking at each other's events. And even in old days of Hollywood, like the Rat Pack and Adam Sandler and all of his comedian friends are like in all of each other's movies. Like you see this collaboration exists. So networking and who you know and who knows you is very important, because if you think about this, every single opportunity that you've had in your entire life was a result of someone that you knew or someone that you met. So it's
Yeah.
always somebody that presented that opportunity or was there for you when you needed it. So networking and building the right relationships is key. And like you said, core values are everything. That's how you make all your decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Tony, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. And for anybody listening to this that's going, man, Kev, I really like Tony. I like the way he shows up. I like what he stands for. How can they find you or get more information on what you guys are doing?
Easy ways, since you're already listening to a podcast, I have one as well called 365 Driven. And you can
Okay.
find that also at my website at 365driven.com.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Tony, any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
No, I would say that be really, I guess, learn to, since this show's about network and the people that we know in the context of there for advice, I would say just be very careful who you let in your circle.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to see the good in people, because if we're empaths and we're coaches, we always want to see the good in people. That's how we're wired. My wife is much better at judging character, like on things that I can't see, because I want to see the good in everybody.
Mhm.
But we've been together 22 years and she's 100% accurate on everybody she's called. That's like, they're not good for you. Like, they're not going to be a good person. And I try to convince her otherwise, but after about 10 years of that, of her being 100% right, it's like, I just know that she's better at this than I am. So,
Uh-huh.
I see a lot of times people, especially in the space, they try to, they try to align themselves with bigger names than they have, but for the wrong reasons, because maybe they want to be really famous and they think, hey, if I do this thing with this person, I'll be famous too. And it doesn't work that way. Even you and I as podcasters, we know this. Like, just because we release an episode with some big name, it doesn't mean that all their audience is going to come hang out with us, right? It's
Nope.
just,
Nope.
it doesn't work.
Nope.
So be sure you really you validate and understand who you're aligning with, because sometimes those selfies and stuff like that that you put out there thinking it's going to work end up backfiring on you later on. So Google will tell you a lot of deep, dark secrets about people. And I always recommend, like, hey, if someone sounds too good to be true, jump on Google, go search them, go down the rabbit hole, see what the reviews are, see the references before you commit to going in and being a fan.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tony, once again, I'm going to share what you just. I'm going to let my wife hear this part of the recording, because I'm with you. We will celebrate our 18th wedding anniversary next month. In fact, about on the 20th, and my experience with my wife has been exactly the same, where she is batting 100% over the years on like,
Yep.
honey, you really shouldn't be doing this with so and so. And I'm, oh, it'll be okay. And you know what? Every single time,
Every
looking
time.
back, she was right. And so now I've got to the point where, okay, if she's uncomfortable, we're just going to go with what she feels, you know?
Yep. And sometimes those stories have taken years to materialize, but they've
Oh,
all
yeah.
been true.
Yeah. Yeah.
All been true.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. And so, well, once again, Tony, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I'm really excited to get this out there and share it with a lot of other people. And yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate you, man.
Thank you for your time, Kevin. Thank you for having me on the
You
show.
Absolutely.